Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. So today inshallah ta'ala we will continue the stories of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala an. And last time I had discussed his lineage and his family and his marriage with the two daughters of the Prophet. And briefly, today we will continue with that inshallah ta'ala and finish off what we know of Uthman in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all that we know that he did the major achievements. Now, as I had done with Abu Bakr and Umar, this is obviously a summary but also a detailed explanation. So we've done all of these incidents in the seerah, but now we want to look at them from the perspective of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an. And also, inshallah, today we're going to get to, if Allah permits us to have time, we're going to get to some of the main ahadith narrated about the blessings of Uthman, the fada'il of Uthman, the blessings of Uthman ibn Affan. So let us begin that Uthman ibn Affan, in fact, not much has been narrated about him in the Meccan era. We do not have that many narrations after his conversion to Islam until the emigration to Abyssinia. We know that he came back from Abyssinia and then he migrated to Medina. And in fact, as I said, because he was from the Banu Abd Shams or the Banu Umayyah clan, it appears that he had a type of protection because the Umayyads, by and large, the Banu Umayyah or the Banu Abd Shams, the same clans we said, they seemed, and Abu Sufyan is of that clan, so they seem to have not molested or harassed or intimidated him as much as they did to Bilal and the other Sahaba. And Uthman ibn Affan was of those who migrated to both of the hijras, as we said, and he was of those who migrated to Medina. And when he migrated to Medina, then we see a number of famous incidents that take place that show the personality of Uthman ibn Affan. And of the constant themes of Uthman radiallahu an, that is known even in the Meccan era, that one of the things we do know about the Meccan era is that he financed the freeing of slaves. So his generosity was something that was a constant throughout the seerah. Allah blessed him with plenty of wealth, and Allah Azza wa Jal utilized Uthman's wealth for the benefit of Islam. And as soon as the Muslims migrated to Medina, the first problem they had was a lack of water. And that is because in Mecca there was Zamzam, and in Medina there was no free water. You had to purchase the water. And now you have 300 people that have migrated and they need water, and water is available at a premium. And the main source of water was a well close by that was called Bi'r Ruma. And the person whom it belonged to would charge one handful of grain for every bucket. One handful of grain for every bucket. So you do the math, how much would you need? And one handful of grain is going to feed 2-3 people, like a handful, put it a med, you have put it together. So one handful of grain he would charge for one bucket of water. Imagine you have to wash, drink, clean, all you have to do. Every single time you need water, you need to give, basically it's almost highway robbery, and you have to ration your water out. So eventually the Muslims began to complain of a lack of water. And our Prophet ﷺ said, "Man yashtari bi'r Ruma walahul Jannah." Who can purchase the Bi'r Ruma for the Muslims, and in return I promise him Jannah? Who can purchase Bi'r Ruma? So a number of people went, and of course, why should this guy sell? He has a monopoly on water. Well, not a monopoly, there were other wells, but this is the most convenient well. Why should he sell? So he gave prices that nobody could possibly meet, until finally Uthman came to him and negotiated a price of 35,000 dirhams. 35,000 dirhams, and he purchased Bi'r Ruma and he gave it away. 35,000 dirhams in our times is the equivalent of, well, if you want it to be actually very specific, a dirham these days is typically, if you buy a average quality dirham, it's going to be around $40 to $50 if you're lucky. Otherwise, $80, $90 dirham. So a dirham is around, if you like, even on the lower end, $40. So on average, this would be like $1.5 million. Right? For a group of people that didn't have any money, Uthman ibn Affan purchased one well for basically $1 million something. And he gave it fi sabilillah, so that the Muslims can just drink for free. So we already see from the very beginning of the Madani phase, he's already had a reputation in Mecca. In Medina is going to be even more so, the generosity of Uthman. And eventually the Battle of Badr takes place. Uthman signs up and he wants to go fight in the Battle of Badr. But Ruqayyah's health had deteriorated, and so the Prophet ﷺ commanded him not to go and to remain at her side. So he was the one who nursed her, he was the one who took care of her, and he was the one with her when she passed away. So she passes away in front of Uthman, and the Prophet ﷺ is still at Badr. He is not yet returned. So he is the one who takes care of the janazah and buries her in Baqi'. And one can imagine that there would have been very, very few people because they've gone to Badr. So whoever was there, they are burying Ruqayyah. And Ruqayyah's grave is, of course, exactly where it is to this day. All of the three daughters of the Prophet ﷺ are buried one next to another in Baqi' al-Gharqad, in a famous place. As soon as you enter Baqi' al-Gharqad, as soon as you enter, the brothers can enter. And I had a video online, you can see it as well. As soon as you enter Baqi' al-Gharqad, you will find three graves on the right hand side, and these are Ruqayyah and Kulthum and Zainab. Okay, Ruqayyah, Kulthum and Zainab, in that order, because that's the order they died in. Ruqayyah died first, then Kulthum, and then Zainab at the end. Ruqayyah passed away. He buries Ruqayyah, and as he's walking back from Baqi' to Medina, remember Baqi' was outside the city, right? These days Baqi' is next to the masjid. The whole masjid, as I said many times, was Medina. That was the settlement of Medina. So Baqi' is outside the city of Medina. And as he's coming back in, he hears Zayd ibn Haritha crying out, Allahu Akbar, we have achieved victory, Allah has given us victory. And he mentions all of the people who have been killed in Badr and the victories of Badr, and he meets Uthman coming back from the burial of Ruqayyah. So the same day of the conquest of Badr was the day that Ruqayyah passed away, and our Prophet ﷺ therefore did not pray janazah over her funeral. Rather, when he came back, he then went and prayed in Baqi'. He prayed for Ruqayyah in Baqi', a special prayer, because he did not catch the actual janazah of his daughter Ruqayyah. So because Uthman had wanted to volunteer, and he had a legitimate excuse and a direct command from the Prophet ﷺ not to participate, he actually is considered to be a Badri, even though he didn't go to Badr. So he is one of the very few who is a Badri, even though he was physically not at Badr. And this is a blessing from Allah. He got the best of both worlds. He didn't have to fight, he didn't participate, yet he is a participant and he is a fighter. And this is proven in that when the booties of the war booties were distributed, Uthman got a full share of a fighter. So the Prophet ﷺ assigned him exactly what he would have gotten if he were physically in the battlefield. Because he wanted to go, and he had signed up, but the Prophet ﷺ said, no, take care of Ruqayyah. So he is obeying the Prophet ﷺ by staying at home, and therefore he is considered to be someone who is a Badri. And many years later, 35 years later, when the riffraff and the rebels and the people, the ghawgha, they called them, the people that were causing fitna, they started accusing Uthman, and they started grumbling about Uthman, and you can see how shallow their criticisms were. We'll talk about this, of course, in 3-4 weeks, inshallah, when we get there, that some of these criticisms were so blatantly shallow. Of them, they said, he didn't participate at Badr. This is of the criticism that eventually is going to cause the death of Uthman. Just look, the fact that they're mentioning something so shallow, he didn't participate at Badr. And they actually said this when they were around and surrounding his house, because the siege lasted for weeks, as we'll come to. It lasted for weeks. That they demanded, and of what they're saying is, you didn't come to Badr. Yani 35 years later, a bunch of people who didn't participate in even one expedition. None of these are Sahaba around the house of Uthman. None of them ever saw the Prophet ﷺ, and they have the audacity to complain, you didn't participate at Badr. And Uthman had to explain to them, I didn't participate because the Prophet ﷺ commanded me not to, and he actually gave me a full share of the battle of Badr. So he said this as an 83-year-old man. He goes back 35 years and he tells them, I didn't, actually more than this, 47 years he goes back, and he goes, I didn't participate because of the command of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Ruqayya passes away, and in Rabi' al-Awwal of the third year, the Prophet ﷺ then offers his daughter Kulthum to Uthman. And we mentioned the stories last week that Umar had offered his daughter Hafsa, and Uthman had politely turned her down, even though he might have been interested, but he knew that the Prophet was interested. And so the Prophet offered Kulthum to Uthman, and Ayman, the servant of Amina and Abdullah, Ayman was the one who prepared Kulthum, because they would obviously, like all women of our times, this is the custom of the world, that they are prepared for marriage. They wear a special dress, and they are the standard, decorations that every culture has when a woman gets married. So Ayman was the one who prepared Kulthum for Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an, and he married her in Rabi' al-Awwal of the third year of the Hijrah. And barely a year goes by when his son Abdullah passes away. And we mentioned the story of Abdullah's death as well. So Abdullah passes away in Jumad al-Awwal of the fourth year of the Hijrah. And so the only grandson of the Prophet ﷺ to Uthman is Abdullah. So Uthman has the honor of being the father of one of the grandchildren of the Prophet ﷺ. He has the honor of being the father of one of the grandchildren of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is Abdullah. And as I said, we have absolutely no narrations of Abdullah whatsoever, because this is early Medina, third, fourth year of the Hijrah. All we know is that he passed away because of some infection, because an animal had pecked him, and so he had some infection that festered, and then he passed away as a young child of 6 years old. And the Prophet ﷺ himself prayed janazah, and Uthman was the one who went into the Baqi' and buried him somewhere in Baqi'. We don't know exactly where, but in Baqi' somewhere is also one of the grandchildren of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is Abdullah ibn Uthman ibn Affan. Now in the Battle of Uhud, Uthman participated with one of the people, or as one of the people, as one of the warriors, as one of the fighters, and he was of those who repelled the Quraysh in the first instance. However, as we all know the story, Khalid ibn al-Walid doubled back and surprised the Muslims after, we would estimate, at least 2 hours or 3 hours, and the Muslims had completely thought that the war is over, it's done, and some of them had taken their armor off, and many of them, almost all of them, had abandoned their weapons. And so they're just cleaning up, and they're taking the ghanima, and they're just packing and basically exulting over the victory. And Khalid bin Walid launches a surprise attack. And I talked about this in a lot of detail so many years ago when we did the Battle of Uhud. And some groups of Sahaba attempted to repel. Other groups of Sahaba were more concerned to find the Prophet ﷺ, and they fled to find him. So they didn't flee the battlefield. They're running to see where is the Prophet ﷺ. And one group, in the helter-skelter and chaos, they turned their backs and they fled. And Uthman ibn Affan was of this third category. That the confusion, the chaos, the surprise attack, doesn't know what to do. There is no reinforcement. There is no leadership right now to unite them. He simply runs, fearing for his life. And Allah knows best what we would have done. Think about that as well. We would all have done more than this, right? So he turns his back and he runs away. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this group of people. And in the Quran, He explicitly says, I have forgiven you. In the Quran, it is explicit. And this is Surah Ali Imran, verse 115. Explicit. Ali Imran, verse 115. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَلَّوْا مِنْكُمْ يَوْمَ الْتَقَى الْجَمْعَانِ. Those of you who turned their backs on the day the two armies met, إِنَّمَا اسْتَزَلَّهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ بِبَعْضِ مَا كَسَبُوا. Shaitan caused them to slip into error because of some things that they had done. This is a weakness that took place, and Shaitan took advantage of it. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that وَلَقَدْ عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ حَلِيمٌ. Allah has forgiven this from them, for Allah is Ghafoor and Allah is Halim. So Allah explicitly says, عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ. And عَفَى means in Arabic, erase as if it never happened. As we said many times when we do Allahumma innaka afuwwun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anna. Afa means to erase as if it never happened. And Allah uses the term afa. So it is quite literally as if it never happened. Therefore, anybody who mentions this as a criticism of Uthman has contradicted the explicit text of the Quran. That Allah Azza wa Jal Himself says, it's as if it never happened. And Allah is Ghafoor and Halim. So this cannot be used as a criticism of Uthman, even though those people who killed him used it as a criticism. And in defense, Ibn Umar and others, they said, how could you say this when Allah Himself has said, Allah has forgiven? Who are you then to find this problematic? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven. And of course the context really, it was so chaotic. There was no united group and people just fled helter-skelter, some of them. And Uthman was of those who happened to do this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it is something that is completely forgiven. We also learn from the seerah that Uthman ibn Affan was chosen multiple times, at least on 3 occasions. He was chosen by the Prophet ﷺ to be the governor of Medina in the absence of the Prophet ﷺ. By governor we mean the one in charge, the mayor, whoever. Like there has to be somebody in charge of the affairs when the Prophet ﷺ is not there. And he chose a few people. Ibn Maktoum was one of them. Ibn Mas'ud. Sometimes he chose Uthman ibn Affan. So Uthman is one of the few people whom the Prophet ﷺ handed authority over to when he himself was not in the city. And this means that Uthman would have been delivering the khutbah, he would have been leading the salawat, he would have been in charge of dealing with any affairs that take place, solving any problems, being the qadi or the judge. All of this would have been the role of Uthman in the life of the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet ﷺ was not in Medina. So this was a great honor for Uthman, and it demonstrates that the Prophet ﷺ trusted his leadership skills. Of course, the most honorable and the most important incident that takes place with Uthman in the seerah is of course the incident of Hudaybiyah. The incident of Hudaybiyah. When the Prophet ﷺ decided to send an envoy to negotiate with the Quraysh. And initially he sent a Sahabi who was not a Qurashi. He sent a Sahabi who's not a Qurashi. And they made fun of him and they ridiculed him, and they in fact cut off the kneecaps of the camel. You know, they hamstring the camel. They just they cut off something so that the camel cannot walk properly, so that he had to walk back, like as a humiliation for him, like that he wouldn't be able to ride the camel back to the Muslims. So this Sahabi comes back, and the point being, we're not going to negotiate except with one of our own, like their jahili, their arrogance, like we want a Qurashi. So the Prophet ﷺ said to Umar, "Oh Umar, you go. Negotiate our terms," because Umar is a strict man. What are the terms of the treaty? What did the Prophet sent Umar with? We don't want anything from you. We just want to do Umrah. That's all. We don't want anything from you. You have no right to stop us. You see us in ihram. You see us with our sacrificial animals. Let us perform the Umrah. As I said, when we talked about Hudaybiyah and the incident, the Quraysh had never refused anybody in its history to enter Makkah, because that's not their prerogative. It's not their right. And it was well known that even a tribe that was at war with Quraysh in the Ashhurul Hurum, in Hajj and in the 4 months of Ashhurul Hurum, they would be allowed to come to Mecca without anyone stopping them or harming them. This was one of the reasons why Quraysh was respected, that they didn't become petty when it came to the Hajj and Umrah. Anybody could come. So the first time in Arabian history anybody was stopped was the Prophet ﷺ entering Mecca. So he sends Umar ibn al-Khattab. He asks Umar to go, and Umar says, "Ya Rasulullah, you know that I have no one left of the Banu Adi in Mecca, and you know my stance and attitude towards the Quraysh and theirs towards me. If you want, I shall go." I mean, he's not scared, this is Umar, but he's thinking in terms of politics, who's the best person. "If you want, I will go. But if you want, Ya Rasulullah, should I suggest someone whose family is more than mine?" So he knows how the Quraysh thinks, and he knows the most effective, whose family is more than mine and whose family will protect him from any harm, and that is Uthman ibn Affan. So the Prophet ﷺ agreed with this position of Umar. And we know Umar multiple times he suggested things and the Sharia or the Quran or the Prophet ﷺ agreed with it. And this is one of those times that Umar understood, my personality and reputation is probably not the best if you want to get the job done. And honestly, this is truly a great sign of Umar ibn Khattab, that he steps down and he allows somebody else to take his place, because he understands that this is not a matter of ego, the Prophet ﷺ chose me. It's a matter of who's going to get the job done the best. And my reputation and interactions is maybe going to harm the job. Why don't you choose somebody who has a better CV, a better resume for this position? And this is a sign of humbleness that only a great leader can have. And Umar was indeed a daraja over Uthman. He gave up the position because he understood Uthman is better than me for this role. And so the Prophet agreed with it. He said, yes, Uthman, you go. And Uthman ibn Affan was of course from the Banu Umayyah. And remember now, the most senior person alive in the Quraysh is Abu Sufyan. And Abu Sufyan is Banu Umayyah. Uthman's father is his first cousin, right? So Abu Sufyan is like an uncle to him. Literally, Abu Sufyan, and Muawiyah is his cousin. That's why Muawiyah defended Uthman, quote unquote, when the Ali issue happened. Later on, we'll talk about that very briefly. So Umar understood that this is Jahiliyyah, that these people, the Quraysh, are still in that mentality, and they will respect Uthman more than they'll respect me. And they'll listen to Uthman and negotiate with Uthman better than they'll negotiate with me. And subhanAllah, this is the reality really of the world, that people have this inherent tribalism, even if technically they shouldn't even have it. I mean, to be brutally honest here, let's be honest, when it comes to even this land that we live in, who will be representing us best in the media? It won't be someone with my skin color. Let's be brutally honest here. If we could find somebody to have to negotiate our space in this land, still there is inherent racism. And if we could find a Caucasian convert, we could find an African American, they have more claim, even though I was born here, doesn't matter. The reality is, I am viewed as an immigrant and a son of an immigrant, because technically I am the son of an immigrant, right? And this is a very true reality that we as immigrant Muslims need to understand and be like Umar ibn al-Khattab, by the way. We need to understand. We need to be Umar ibn al-Khattab over here and realize that, you know what? People flock to of their own kind. And if we can have a person who represents us who is of their ethnicity, in fact, it will actually be better for us. Unfortunately, and I say this as a second generation immigrant, a lot of times we try to dismiss the narrative of people that have more lineage than we do. Yes, it is true in Islam there's no such thing as lineage, but this isn't Islam, this is Jahiliyyah. Right? Let's be honest here. This is people who are coming from Jahiliyyah. It is true that the ideals of America say it doesn't matter where you're from. Let them say that. Look at the racism we know is happening. Look at all of what's happening. In the end of the day, it is an undeniable reality. People are more comfortable with their own group, their own flock. So we as well at times need to be more like Umar ibn al-Khattab. At times it depends. Sometimes this, sometimes that. The point is, just to give an example that's practical here, that yes, we do need people as well who have more authentic lineage. They go back not just 50 years as in my case with my father coming here, but rather 400 years. If we find somebody, and alhamdulillah I have some friends even that their ancestors came on the Mayflower, Muslim converts, right? Now somebody like that, I want another colleague, one of his ancestors is actually a famous president of the 1800s, and his last name is the same as that. I know this brother. He's well known and in the community he's activist. So his ancestor is actually one of the presidents of early 1900 America, right? These types of people, when they come out and say, I'm a Muslim, that's a huge difference than me and you coming out and saying it, right? There's a time and a place where we need to take charge. There's a time and place we let others take charge as well. This is the leadership of Umar ibn Khattab. In any case, back to our story. So Uthman is sent, and of course, as soon as Uthman comes into Makkah, and subhanAllah, just imagine, he's coming to his home city. He hasn't seen it in 6-7 years. They've been exiled and banned. They've been asked to leave. Now he's coming back, and this is his city. He knows every street, every alleyway. Everybody recognizes him. This is one of their own. And as he enters the city, some people, the riffraff, immediately began to say, go back, we don't want you here, this and that. But one of his cousins, Aban ibn Sa'id ibn al-As, his second cousin, he recognizes him. And he embraces him, and he gets off his own horse and gives Uthman the horse. And he says to him, you're under my protection today. Because that was the Jahili time, where I keep on telling you, you had to have somebody protect. You had to have somebody say, this is my responsibility. And because there is no bureaucracy, there is no visa, there is no office you apply to, everybody has the right to extend a personal invitation to somebody. Everybody, every Qurashi. In fact, this right has been given to Islam as well. Our Prophet ﷺ said, every Muslim has the right to extend this aman. This was in classical times, that every Muslim can say, this trader is my responsibility. This person coming in, this craftsman, whoever, he is my responsibility. That I allow him to come, so you all have to protect him. So Uthman radiallahu anhu is protected by his basically second cousin, Affan ibn Sa'id ibn al-As. And Affan says to him that, you have this horse, you have my protection, do what you want. You're free to do whatever you want. So now that he has this guarantee and he has a mount, now he has to go to the houses of all of the leaders of the Quraysh and negotiate one by one. So he goes to Abu Sufyan, he goes to Safwan ibn Umayyah, he goes to the big shots of the Quraysh, and he proposes the conditions of the Prophet, which are very simple. There are no conditions. We're just coming for Umrah. We don't want any war. You're the one stopping us. Let us come in. We don't want any harm. No trouble. Just let us come. And each one of them refuses and says, we're not going to allow the Muslims to come. We cannot allow you to come. And the news spreads that Uthman is in town. And in Mecca at the time, there are two categories of Muslims. Number one, Muslims who have been imprisoned by their own families, either literally in shackles and chains, or they have been basically threatened to be killed or whatnot if they leave. So they're not technically in shackles, but they cannot leave. Mustad'afin, for whatever reason, they cannot go. Everybody knows that there's a bounty on their heads. They cannot go out of the city because you need to hire somebody. So there's a risk to go. That's one category of Muslims. Another category of Muslims are secret Muslims. People who had converted, but nobody knew they had converted. And Allah explicitly mentions this category in the Quran. Where does He mention this in the Quran? Who can remind me? Allah explicitly mentions this category in the Quran. Anybody? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the conquest of Makkah, and Allah says that were it not for my bounty on you, Allah had averted war. Were it not for my averting war, you would have done things that you would regret, meaning you would kill people and you wouldn't even know they were Muslim. Right? So this is explicitly mentioned in the Quran, that there are groups of people that had converted in Mecca and they hadn't announced their Islam, and maybe another Muslim might have known, but it wasn't public. So when Uthman's news spread that he's in the city, both groups of Muslims wanted to see him. And it appears, now we don't know this explicitly, but it appears that he held a secret meeting with these groups. And this was also one of the causes of his delay. Because we know he was delayed. One of the causes of the delay was the arrogance of the leaders to meet him. Took time. But another cause of delay was to get these Muslims and assemble them, and they needed encouragement. They have been cut off. They're being persecuted. And Uthman is here in direct access to the Prophet ﷺ. There's no messenger that can go between them, no emissary. And so they needed some boost, some encouragement. And Uthman was the one. They're meeting with Uthman. Can you imagine in that situation? Right? So it was a huge relief to them. And to hear news of the Prophet ﷺ, and for them to convey their specific requests and du'as and greetings to the Prophet ﷺ would have been the best miracle or the best calming for them in this tense situation. So, as we all know, this caused Uthman to be delayed significantly beyond what was to be expected, by at least half a day. Like, what was expected to be maybe a 2-3 hour trip becomes maybe an 8-9 hour trip, right? 6-7 hours extra, bare minimum. And, of course, as he's walking out, the Quraysh offer him, now that you're here, you might as well do tawaf. We allow you to do tawaf. We allow you to do tawaf around the Kaaba. And Uthman ibn Affan, of course, refuses, and he says, it is not permissible for me to do tawaf when you are depriving the Prophet ﷺ doing tawaf. It is not permissible for me. I cannot do tawaf when the Prophet ﷺ has not been allowed to do tawaf. So we all know that this extreme delay caused rumors to spread, and no one has mentioned how or why these rumors were spread. But the fact of the matter is that this is exactly what happens when people are just wondering out loud, talking. You know, one can imagine somebody would have said, where is he? Is he all right? Maybe they've hurt him. Maybe they've imprisoned him. Maybe they've killed him, right? And then that maybe they've killed him becomes a rumor. People are saying they killed him. And then that rumor becomes, oh my God, there's people. So one thing literally out of nothing, right? And wallahi, every one of us has experienced this in our own lives. Sometimes we have been a part of it. Every one of us, like once, sometimes without even any. In this case, the rumor was completely baseless. There wasn't even a hint that Uthman is imprisoned or harmed, right? But this is what happens, and it's human nature, and it shows us as well that this is the reality of human beings. When everybody starts to say it, then it becomes something that is almost a fact. And this is now, we the Muslims, the Sahaba, are getting worried. And this worriness is translated into concerns of what's happening to Uthman. Slowly but surely, the rumor becomes almost an allegation and a fact. And even the Prophet ﷺ is now hearing that Uthman might have been killed, Uthman might have been killed. And that was when the Prophet ﷺ announced that we are going to avenge the death of Uthman. If this is true. That if this is true, we are not going to let this go in waste. And that is when he asked the Sahaba for a special oath of allegiance. Obviously the famous Bay'atul Ridwan. And the oath of allegiance was special, and it was so significant because the Muslims are in their ihram, no armor, no helmets, no spears, no bows and arrows. Some might only have what is called a traveling sword, which is typically used for animals. If an animal, it's not the sword of war. It's not the sharp scimitar. It's more of a thing that you're going to fend off animals from. That's all they have. They're tired. They've been walking for 2 weeks. And they're now, tired and hungry. And the Quraysh are well fed, well armed. All of their supplies are there. And numerically they're more. So the Prophet ﷺ demanded the oath of allegiance that we, if need be, will defend the blood of Uthman, and none of us will turn our backs and flee. And that was an act of bravery, of immense courage, that we all know Allah, this was the wisdom of Allah testing the Sahaba. 1,400 of the Sahaba gave Bay'atul Ridwan, the oath of allegiance. One munafiq, we know from, we mentioned his name and everything, he refused to give the oath of allegiance, and his hypocrisy was demonstrated. The rest of the 1,400 gave the oath of allegiance. And of course the most significant, and what really demonstrates the highest honor for Uthman, is that the Prophet ﷺ, at the very end of this, he took his own hand and he put it in his hand, and he said, this is the hand of Uthman. This is Uthman's bay'ah. So he acted out Uthman. And this is the highest honor that the Prophet ﷺ ever gave to Uthman. That his limb becomes Uthman. And he testifies with his tongue and his body that if Uthman had been here, this would have been Uthman. So the Prophet ﷺ's tazkiyah, or his testimony of Uthman, is the highest possible. He literally acts it out, and then he says it. This is on behalf of Uthman. And this is the greatest honor that the Prophet ﷺ has given to Uthman ibn Affan. And for us this is enough, but there are so many other hadith as well. But this one hadith is enough. And again, just to show you how ludicrous the allegations were 35 years later, can you believe some of the people outside the house of Uthman who eventually killed him said, تَخَلَّفَ عُثْمَانَ عَنْ بَيْعَةِ الرِّضْوَانِ. Uthman was absent from Bay'atul Ridwan. Can you believe this was an allegation, right? Uthman was the cause of Bay'atul Ridwan. And one of the accusations that the people, the riffraff, gave is that he was missing at Bay'atul Ridwan, right? And it shows you the mentality of those people. He was missing at Badr, right? He fled Uhud. He wasn't at Ridwan. This is what they were saying of Uthman. Wallahi, it shows you no matter how much good you have, people with the disease will flip it around and find a fault. Because technically, he wasn't at Badr. Technically, he fled Uhud. Technically, he did not give the bay'ah himself, right? So technically, it's as if what they're saying is true. But wallahi, how false is it, even though those specific points were true? If this is their mentality, what do you think of the rest of their accusations? And we're going to come to some of them later on, inshallah ta'ala. So, another incident, and this incident is one of those controversial ones. I went over it in the seerah. We're going to have to go over it again as well right now. It's one of those awkward ones that we have to just be honest about. And I'd rather you hear it from me than you hear it from others, as I said so many times. And this involves a particular person who had become murtad in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. His name is Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh. Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh. And Abdullah had accepted Islam before the conquest of Makkah. He had emigrated to Medina, and Shaitan caused him to slip, and he made a statement of kufr, and he then rejected Islam and returned back to Makkah. Okay, one of the very few. As we know, there were literally a handful of people. Literally, just quite literally, a handful of people. He was one of them. And his story involves a lot of things. Now, by the way, the correct version of this story was that he was one of the scribes of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ was reciting, dictating to him Surah Al-Mu'minun. Surah Al-Mu'minun. And the first page of it mentions that Allah has created إنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم جعلنا في قرار مكين ثم جعلنا النطفة علقة فخلقنا علقة مضغة فخلقنا المضغة عظاما فكسونا العظام لحما ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر. Right? So it's a very powerful passage. We created insan from this, then we did this, then we did this, we did this. Very powerful passage. And Abdullah just happened to remark, Tabarakallahu ahsanul khaliqeen. And the Prophet ﷺ said, that is the end of the verse, which it is. Fatabarakallahu ahsanul khaliqeen. We still recite it to this day, right? So Shaitan caused Abdullah to feel doubt, that it can't be the end of the verse because I just said it. You see what happened here? That it can't be the end of the verse, I just said it. And this doubt caused him to then leave Islam and return back to Makkah. Okay? So, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, barely a handful of people became murtad. And we know the penalty for ridda in Islam. And so when the Prophet ﷺ conquered Makkah, as we know, he gave that list. Now, scholars differ how long it was, but it was literally 5, 6, 7 men or whatever, or 4 men, and literally a list of less than 10 people out of 3,000. Just imagine, less than 1.1%. Okay? These people, we have to not forgive them. You remember the story. Abdullah is one of them. Okay? Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh is one of them. Now, Uthman is one of those of the army who conquers Makkah. He returns to his house. His house is now back to him now, and he's living in his house. Lo and behold, Abdullah shows up. Why would Abdullah show up to Uthman's house? Because Abdullah and Uthman were foster brothers. Abdullah's mother suckled or fostered and took care of Uthman. And they grew up together. And foster brothers form bonds like brothers, even Islamically and at times even emotionally. And Uthman and Abdullah were those types, that they formed a strong bond growing up. So Abdullah is his foster brother, and he shows up in the house of Uthman, begging, crying, pleading for his life, saying he's sorry, saying he is now a Muslim again, he was wrong to become a murtad, and he regrets it, but now, of course, there's a warrant out for him. Right? Not dead or alive, dead. Because our Prophet ﷺ said, "Uqtuluhum, kill them wherever you find them. Even if they're holding on to the Kaaba, there is no sanctity to this list. To this list, there is no sanctity." Right? Every one of them. And Ikrimah, now by the way, of this list, half were forgiven even. Remember, he's one of those half. Of that list, half were forgiven. He is one of those that are eventually forgiven. So his story is that he comes to the house of Uthman, begging, pleading, crying. And Uthman really feels the sincerity, that he genuinely regretted leaving and becoming murtad. He genuinely felt bad and he wanted to make up, and so he begs Uthman to do something. And so when things had calmed down and the conquest is over and things seem to resume. So it's not as if it's just the day after the conquest. Allah knows how many, but maybe 3-4 days after the conquest, Uthman takes Abdullah by the hand and takes him to the Prophet ﷺ and begins to shafa'ah for him. Shafa'ah, intercede for him. And he says, Ya Rasulullah, this is my foster brother. Ya Rasulullah, his mother took care of me. His mother loved me more than she loved him. And Ya Rasulullah, he came begging and pleading, Ya Rasulullah, please accept his Islam. And he is there trembling. Okay? And the Prophet ﷺ is silent, saying nothing. Dead silence, pin drop silence. Just imagine the whole crowd and whatnot. Uthman has presented his case and the Prophet ﷺ is not moving at all, just silent. When the pause gets very long, then the Prophet ﷺ said, very well, I shall accept. And Abdullah embraces, cries, says the shahada, and Abdullah and Uthman leave happy. The Prophet ﷺ turns to the rest of the Sahaba, they have gone, and he says, wasn't there an intelligent man amongst you? When you saw that I hesitated, couldn't one of you have done the deed? You see what's happening here, right? And they said, Ya Rasulullah, we don't know what you're thinking. And obviously, how are they going to do something? What if it was wrong, right? Ya Rasulullah, we don't know what you're thinking. Why didn't you give us a motion with your eyes to indicate? Like show us with your eyes, like show us like this, whatever, Do something. At least indicate. And we would have done it. Not even your mouth, just say it, or ishara, right? And our Prophet ﷺ said, ما كان لنبي أن يكون له خائنة الأعين. It is not befitting that a prophet has خائنة الأعين. خائنة الأعين is a phrase in Arabic. It's translated as a betrayal of the eyes or a treachery of the eyes. What it means is that it is not befitting the dignity of a prophet that he says something and his eyes indicate something else. If I didn't want to forgive him, I should say it or else not say it. I'm not going to do like this with my eyes and then verbally say yes. That's not befitting of a prophet. I'm not going to communicate my wishes in that manner. It's not appropriate, it's not befitting the dignity of a prophet that he resort to this. I can't do that. Okay? Now, this incident is actually a very, very deep one. It's a very profound incident. And again, I'd rather you hear it from me than anybody else, because it does demonstrate a reality that is awkward for many modern Muslims to embrace, but honestly, it is a reality that any politician understands, any person of leadership understands, and that is, you can't always be merciful. There has to be some strictness and justice. There has to be the exception, we've said this many times, that you show something that people should be scared of. And the general rule is mercy, yes. But you can't just forgive, because then you're going to have too many Abdullah ibn Abi Sarhs. What happened? There has to be some exceptions. And here is again the awkward thing that many modern Muslims, they project an image of the Prophet that goes against the seerah. And that image, when it goes against the seerah, then they read the seerah, they get doubts on their Islam. Or when Orientalists or non-Muslims bring this up and they throw it into the minds of the Muslims, so it kind of destroys their iman. And it doesn't need to be the case. The fact of the matter is that less than 0.1% of the people of Makkah are on this list. And even of that 0.1, half of them are forgiven, such as Abdullah. Some of them willingly, like Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. Willingly. He genuinely comes back, as you know, and he tells his whole story. And I went over it when I talked about it. And the Prophet ﷺ embraces it. Yes, okay, that's good. You're genuine. And some of them reluctantly, such as Abdullah. This is reluctant. Nobody can deny this. The Prophet ﷺ at this stage did not want him but nobody's doing anything, and he cannot be other than rahmatan lil alameen. Like the niyyah of the Prophet was, let the deed be done, and I wouldn't have refused his acceptance, but I wouldn't have accepted it. You see this perfect, because he cannot reject someone's Islam, but he didn't want to accept it either. But the Sahaba as well, we understand their dilemma. How can you stand up and do this deed in case, what if you're wrong? You're in big trouble. This is also understood from their perspective. So the Prophet ﷺ then accepts his Islam, and here's the point now, that subhanAllah, when Abdullah does convert, as the later historians mention, Imam al-Dhahabi in his Siyar and others, they say that after this acceptance of Islam, nothing has been narrated from him except good deeds. Like he genuinely benefited the ummah. And this demonstrates that Allah Azza wa Jal knows and no other human being knows. And it demonstrates that even at times, the Prophet ﷺ's will was something and Allah will something else. And it was Allah's will that took place and not the will of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is a very, very theological, aqadi, tawheedi point. That even Rasulullah ﷺ wanted something, but Allah knew something else is better. And Allah decided other than this. And it didn't happen. And of course, now that he's a Muslim, so then of course he's treated like a Muslim and everything is normal. And in fact, Abdullah fought in many expeditions. He fought against the Romans, he fought against the Byzantines. In fact, he was one of the most important commanders of Egypt. In fact, our Sudanese brothers owe a lot to him, because he was the commander who conquered Sudan, the upper part of basically Sudan, and his army was the army that opened up Afriqiya, many areas of North Africa. So Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh actually, Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh actually was one of the main victory commanders in Africa, one land after another, and eventually he was appointed one of the first governors of Egypt as well. One of the first Muslim governors of Egypt was the same Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh. Then Uthman was killed. In the time of Uthman, he was appointed. Uthman was killed, and the fitna broke out, and Abdullah resigned from politics. He didn't want to get involved. And he was one of the handful of Sahaba, very few, who said, I don't want to take either side. And he went to a small town in Bilad al-Sham and lived a very low-key life, without getting involved in this side or that side. And he passed away basically towards the very, very last days of Ali ibn Abi Talib's Khilafah. And in fact, he made dua to Allah that, oh Allah, take me when I am praying Salat al-Fajr. And one day he did wudu and he prayed Salat al-Fajr, and he said salam to one side, and before he could say the other salam, he fell down dead during Salat al-Fajr, during Fajr Salah. So, subhanAllah, it shows that his repentance was sincere repentance, and that he genuinely wanted to make up for all that he had done, and Allah Azza wa Jal accepted that, inshaAllah ta'ala, from him. And so the interesting story of Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh. Now back to Uthman. So we talked about the conquest of Makkah, and this is Uthman's shafa'ah for his foster brother. Back to Uthman. The next major incident is the Battle of Tabuk, and again, every one of you knows this, the famous story of the Prophet ﷺ standing on the khutbah, and he is basically having the fundraiser for Tabuk. Who is going to finance Jaysh al-Usra? Who is going to finance Jaysh al-Usra? And I guarantee him Jannah. And so Uthman stands up and he says, Ya Rasulullah, 100 camels with all that is on it will be theirs. And the Prophet ﷺ continues to ask, and he gives another 100 and another 100, until finally he says that whatever Uthman does after this will never harm him. In another version, the Prophet ﷺ was asking for the funds for the Battle of Tabuk, and Uthman came with a sack full of coins, a sack full, and he poured it in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and the coins just piled up. And this is more than millions now. Gold coins, more than millions now. And the Prophet, and this is like a massive pile in front of the Prophet, and the Prophet began flipping the coins in his hand, and he said, Wallahi ma darra Uthman ma fa'ala ba'da al-yawm. Anything Uthman does after today can never hurt him. No matter what he does, he has purchased Jannah today. And this, by the way, it's as if the Prophet is saying these statements to protect the honor of Uthman. That these types of statements, like no matter what he does, that's it, he has demonstrated his iman today. That in essence, he basically gave almost all of his fortunes that he had. And by the way, this shows you, this is the sunnah of Allah Azza wa Jal. So many multiple times Uthman is giving his money. Lo and behold, it comes back all over again and more. And he gives it again. Lo and behold, even more. And he gives it again. This is the sunnah of Allah Azza wa Jal. That Uthman is giving and giving and giving. And yet, mashallah, he's always in the top few of the Sahaba in terms of wealth. Because this is the sunnah of Allah. Whenever you give, you will get it back and more than that. And Uthman's life proves this over and over again. And eventually, of course, so it is as if Uthman single-handedly financed the Ghazwat al-Tabuk. All the rest of the Sahaba, their additions were a small percentage. The bulk of the financing, single-handedly, was Uthman ibn Affan. And I have said this many, many times before, each of the Sahaba had a role. Uthman ibn Affan was not known for his physical strength. He was not an Umar ibn Khattab. He wasn't known for charging in the battle. He had a thin body. He was a thin man. And he had an average stature. He wasn't known for the physical. But we didn't need him for that. We didn't need him for that. We had Umar, we had Sa'ad ibn Abi Qas, we had Abu Ubaidah Amir al-Jarrah, we had Abu Dahda, we had so many of the Sahaba. That's what they're known for. He wasn't known for his military genius either. But we have Khalid ibn Walid. He wasn't known for his so many other things. But what was he known for? Number one, and that is his finance. And number two was the Quran. His recitation and his preservation of the Quran. And for both of these, the Ummah has recognized him. That's what everybody associates with Uthman. His generosity and the Quran. Because he was always reciting the Quran and he died upon the Quran. And the Quran is called Mus'haf al-Uthmani. Right, as I said, this is how Allah honored him. Because that's what he was known for, his generosity and his Quran. And in the 9th year as well, in the Battle of Tabuk, after they came back, in the 9th year, Kulthum passed away as well. And there were no children. So Ruqayya and him had Abdullah, Kulthum and him had no children. She died without progeny. And subhanAllah, once again, we find the patience that when he was married to these two ladies, he never married any other lady, even though it was the custom of the time, and almost everybody. Abu Bakr had multiple wives, Umar had multiple wives, but of course Uthman is married to the daughters of the Prophet, and he's not going to take multiple. Even his haya is not going to. So he was waiting for so long, and he has no children now. No children to show for it, and he is now almost in his mid-40s. No children. But he is patient, and what's going to happen? Before he passes away, he has almost 15 children. This is Allah's sunnah. You're patient, and Allah will give you back. And he was married to the daughters of the Prophet. He was patient with them, and he didn't take any other wife because he knew that would hurt the Prophet. He knew it would hurt nothing. So when Allah Azza wa Jal then gave him back 9 sons, 5 daughters. Not from Ruqayya and Kulthum, but from the other ladies after he married. Okay, so Kulthum passes away, and eventually, and of course, when Kulthum passes away, and by the way, Kulthum, we don't know what her name was. Was that her name? Or was there another name that she had? Actually, we don't know. There's 1 or 2 early authorities, they say that her name was Umayyah, and Kulthum was her kunya. And others, and this is the majority opinion, was that she was named Kulthum. That was her name. And it was rare, but not unheard of, to name a person by the kunya. It was rare but not unheard of. And it was very common that there was a name, but the name was in effect forgotten, and the kunya becomes the name. And if this is what happened, then maybe Umayyah might have been the name that Khadija chose, and then at a very young age, for some story that we don't know, the kunya Kulthum was given, and that was her name. And of course, we gave an example, Abu Bakr, right? Abu Bakr, Abdullah. Who knows Abdullah? It's gone. It's the kunya now becomes the name. So maybe in this case, Kulthum had a different name, and it was not unheard of, but very rare, that very rarely the child would be given the kunya as a name. And most ulama say this is what happened with Kulthum, that her name was Kulthum. And as I said, some ulama say her name is Umayyah, and the kunya of Kulthum is given. Nonetheless, Kulthum passes away. The Prophet is in Medina. He is not traveling, he is in Medina. And her body is washed by Safiya, the aunt of the Prophet ﷺ, and Asma binti Umais, and the Prophet ﷺ is outside of her room, and he is physically handing the shrouds one after another to the two ladies that are doing ghusl, and he's giving commands how to wash her body, the body of his own daughter, how to wash her body, wash her with this and do that, and then put this on, then put that on, and there's a curtain, and he is then handing, and she had 5 shrouds, one after the other, with all the time he is handing each one of those 5 shrouds to his own daughter. And the Prophet ﷺ accompanied the funeral obviously to Baqi' after praying over it in the masjid, and it was a very emotional day. Everybody was crying, and this was one of the rare times the Prophet ﷺ himself was crying in public. Obviously this is his daughter, and this is now all of his children other than Fatima, right? All of his children other than Fatima, and so he now is burying Kulthum, and he asks them, so who's going to lower the body? So he asks, who amongst you has not touched his wife last night? Meaning you're not have been intimate. So Ali and Talha and others said, we haven't. So he said, you bury the body. You can hold on to the body and do it. So Ali and Fadl ibn Abbas, Abu Talha, Usama ibn Zayd, these are the 4 people. They went into the qabr, and they were the ones who held the body of Kulthum and then lowered it into the grave. And Uthman remained sad for a long period of time after this, and his sorrow could be seen from his face. And wherever he went, you could see grief. He's lost 2 wives, he's lost a son, he has now no family. No family. He's now back a single person, and he would now be 43, 44 years old. So can you imagine? I mean, at this stage of his life now, and he has no family, and he's very, very forlorn and sad. And it is narrated in one hadith, narrated al-Haythami, that the Prophet ﷺ saw him sad, and he became sad. And he said, "Oh Uthman, if I had a 3rd daughter, I would give her to you as well." It's a beautiful hadith. لو كان عندي ثالثة, if I had a 3rd, I'd given you 2, I would have given you a 3rd. And this really shows the status of Uthman radiallahu anhu. I mean, really, the statements and whatnot that the Prophet, you can tell, from the readings of the hadith, you can tell he was a beloved, soft, shy man. This is who Uthman was. That everybody really liked him because he was just one of those people that's just a clean, decent, haya. Nobody has anything negative about Uthman ibn Affan. And so even the Prophet, when he saw him so sad, he said, if I had a 3rd, you would have had her as well. And of course, there is no 3rd. Fatima is married, and Zainab and the others are now, the other is gone. So Uthman, of course, then remains, and the very last thing that we know from the seerah in the lifetime of the Prophet, the very last thing that we know is that once again his generosity is demonstrated. So the Meccan stage, the Madani stage, and right to the very end, it's as if Allah Azza wa Jal always is allowing Uthman the opportunity to spend massive amounts of money. And what's the very last thing that we know that he did in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ? That the Prophet ﷺ wanted to expand the masjid. The masjid is now falling short, a small space. And he says, who will purchase this plot of land? And Allah will give him a better plot in Jannah. So there was a plot in the back of the masjid, and it's for sale. Who's going to purchase this? And Allah will give him a better plot in Jannah. And so Uthman negotiated a price of, some say 20, some say 25,000 dirhams, and he purchased that land and he gave it to the Prophet. And so one of the last acts in the life of the Prophet, of course money is going to happen now, is that, and this is subhanAllah, what an amazing, amazing investment. That very property, where is it now? Which part of the masjid? The Rawdah. The Rawdah. He literally purchases the Rawdah, the back portion of it, right? And quite literally, he purchases the one plot of land that our Prophet ﷺ said is heaven on earth. So a part of the Rawdah, what an investment. Just think about that, right? Everybody who has ever prayed in that spot of land for the last 14 and a half centuries, that is Uthman's investment. How can you compete with that? Just imagine, everybody who's ever walked there, this is the investment of Uthman ibn Affan. This is what he's done for the ummah. That's what our Prophet ﷺ said. Whoever purchases this land, Allah will give him a plot better than this in Jannah. He purchased Rawdah right there. Well, not the whole, you get the point. One plot of the Rawdah that we're still praying on to this day from the finance of Uthman ibn Affan. So subhanAllah, he purchased the water, and he purchased the masjid, and he financed the Tabuk, and on and on and on. He freed so many of the slaves that are now famous Sahaba. This is Uthman ibn Affan. I wanted to quote 10, 15 hadith about the blessings of Uthman, but you can see that that's not going to be possible today. So we will talk about next week, Fada'il of Uthman, and also we will mention some of the things that happened under Abu Bakr and Umar's time, and also some more details about the story of the Shura and the choosing of Uthman. That will be inshallah ta'ala our topic next Wednesday, and then we'll talk after that about some of the things that happened during the Khilafah of Uthman, and then we will eventually get to the sad and the tragic reality, which is the opening of the doors of fitna for this ummah, which is really the one of the most tragic scenarios of the early Islam, the death and the martyrdom of Uthman ibn Affan. And that story I can mention in detail because the people on the other side were all people of fisq and fujur. None of the Sahaba were on the other side, right? The next fitan in the time of Ali, we have to be much more careful, and I'll have to zoom over bird's eye view and be very cautious, because we Sunni Muslims believe both of these sides were good people, and we cannot criticize the one theologically, and that's in the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib. As for now, in Uthman's time, no problem. I can go into some more details. Inshallah, I will go into some detail about their complaints and their background and whatnot. But these people who killed Uthman eventually become the Khawarij. These people who killed Uthman, eventually, they are the ones whom Ali himself fights in Nahawand. They are the ones who then assassinate Ali as well, right? In fact, I'm jumping the gun here, but just to give you some excitement, there is a theory in early Islam even that one of the main killers of Uthman literally is the one who then becomes one of the founders of the Khawarij. And that's very reasonable theory, that one of those people, the riffraff, who was the group leader, eventually becomes the group leader of the same group that is going to attack both Ali and Muawiyah, and that's a very logical extension of the theory. And so we'll get to that inshallah ta'ala in around 2-3 weeks time. Any quick questions about what we've covered today? Yes? Sorry, 155. So the Surah Al Imran verse 155. Surah Al Imran verse 155. I said 115? Yeah, 155. Okay, Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, with that we'll pray Salat al-Asr, Salat al-Isha, and we'll see you inshallah next Wednesday inshallah. Bismillah.